think of liberation theology univocally because they were different streams. They were some ones, such as those in Nicaragua, that have chosen the Marxist ideology as a way of implementing social justice. The result was thousands of dead people in internal revolutions or civil wars that led nowhere. You know, the same guerrilleros in El Salvador and the same people in the National Guard are the ones who are now together in the civil police. It means that if you choose the wrong way, you will arrive nowhere. And this was the temptation during the 80s to arrive to social justice by armed struggle. But this is not the right solution. Now we know that it's politics lead by common good that will take to more justice in the world, not killings, not revolutions. Many people thought, okay, this subject of preferential option for the poor is only ideological. It's a matter of Marxism. I remember many places in Latin America where CELAM and the Conference of Medellin was accused, oh, they are reviving the communism that is failing in other parts of the world. Not a single thing about that, you know. The preferential option for the poor comes from the same Jesus Christ, who in the synagogue of Nazareth, quoting prophet Esaias, said, I have been sent to the poorest of the poor. And all the gospel is a message about that. Not a single thing about that, you know. The preferential option for the poor comes from the same Jesus Christ, who in the synagogue of Nazareth, quoting prophet Esaias, said, I have been sent to the poorest of the poor. And all the gospel is a message. You know, the same guerrilleros in El Salvador and the same people in the National Guard are the ones who are now together in the civil police.
The CIA funneled a portion of that money to the Contras in Nicaragua, the group Reagan supported in their guerrilla fight against the Sandinista government. In 1986, the Lebanese newspaper Al Shura reported the arms deal, and everything began to unravel. That prompted an investigation by the U.S. Attorney General, who discovered that only $12 million of the $30 million actually went toward weapons for Iran. The rest of the money was sent to the Contras in Nicaragua.
And all the gospel is a message about that.
Pope Francis, as Cardinal Bergoglio, suffered through the dictatorships that were there in Argentina, which were very much military dictatorships from the right. He saw the struggle of the people, especially from more the socialist and communist elements, really trying to fight for the poor in Argentina, etc. And when he was the provincial in Buenos Aires of the Jesuits, and again, we have to give credit, the Jesuits were the main ones that really developed liberation theology. I mean, it's not their theology, but a lot of Jesuits were involved in this. In one of their congregations, General Meeting of Jesuits, they decided as an order that would be their focus, social justice. That's our main focus. So they're very much committed to this. And of course, Bergoglio is also influenced with that. The Argentinian Jesuits have always tended to be more conservative, I would say. So it was not like in other countries like Chile or even Brazil or other countries where they were more radical, let's say, and including some of the Jesuits were very much on the theology of revolution that we spoke about. Bergoglio did have as his members fellow Jesuits who were kind of part of this. The only way to change societies is through revolution, through armed conflict. And one example is those two Jesuits that he talks about, and that the government have them located and picked up and basically taken into prison and custody. And they pleaded with him to support them, to really support their struggle. And he very definitely said no. So he couldn't support not the struggle for justice, not the concern for the poor, but that it had to be through arms, through violence. And that's what he couldn't support. And he warns his fellow Jesuits, do not continue in this path, because not only is it against what we're doing, I mean, as Christians, but it's going to bring you problems. And that's what happened. They were imprisoned and tortured, etc. And then, of course, we know, which they didn't know at the time, and we found out until much later, that he had been negotiating with the government, etc., to free his fellow Jesuits, as he could do. And they were freed, etc. They were imprisoned and tortured, etc. And then, of course, we know, which they didn't know at the time, and we found out until much later, that he had been negotiating with the government, etc., to free his fellow Jesuits, as he could do. And they were freed, etc. That he had been negotiating with the government, etc., to free his fellow Jesuits, as he could do. And they were freed, etc. To free his fellow Jesuits, as he could do. And they were freed, etc. But again, I think he was saying, I will not support this strand of liberation theology. I will not support that society can only be changed through violence. This strand of liberation theology, this strand of liberation theology,
because there were different streams.
Throughout the history of the Jesuit order, they will shoot, they will burn, they will flay, they will do whatever it takes to destroy anybody who stands in the way of what they want to do. And so the Catholic Church sought to stop the Protestant Reformation that Luther began, and they couldn't do it. And so about 20 years after Luther stood at the Diet of Worms, the Jesuit order was created. And one of their purposes was to destroy every vestige of the Protestant Reformation, both in the religious realm, in the political realm, and in the economic realm, because the Protestant Reformation not only affected the religious arena, it also affected the political and the economic arenas as well. That was one goal of the Jesuit order. The other aspect was to restore the supremacy and dominance of the Pope throughout the world.
Today, one looks around us to see U.S. presidents and congressmen and women groveling before the Pope. Lincoln's words would seem ironic. Consider this also. In April 2008, the President of the United States, George W. Bush, rushed out to meet the Pope at his plane. Does this not seem to be odd behavior? For the first time in history, a U.S. president went out to meet a religious leader, or for that matter, any leader, upon his entry into the U.S.
No president in the entire history of the United States has ever greeted a foreign diplomat like that, ever. They wait until they're brought into Washington or something. They don't go out on the tarmac. This is a first.
What makes this even more egregious is that the current Pope is a former head of the Office of Inquisition and a former member of the Nazi Party in his youth. Why has this assault on the non-Catholic world been ignored by most people, especially Protestant ministers?
Billy Graham he didn't protest towards the latter part of his life. For the first part, I think he was solid when he first started. But along around the early 60s, his voice was silenced. Robert Schuller, Paul Crouch, Hal Lindsey, Pat Robertson, James Dobson, all of these men, they're not protesting. What they have become are agents agents of Rome.
Now, for Robert Schuller's another 33rd degree Freemason. He went to Rome to get the Pope's blessing to build his Crystal Cathedral. And Robert Schuller is a personal friend of the anti-white, hateful racist Louis Farrakhan, who is another high-level Freemason who runs the Nation of Islam for the Archbishop of Chicago. So we have all these high-level Masonic leaders, black and white, of all these various different religions, working together for agitation among the peoples of this country, but never ever exposing the papacy as the true heart and soul and its real master.
The man who is currently there, he was just recently elected, Nicholas Adolphus. The Black Pope is the head of the Jesuit order. He is called the Black Pope not because he is of African origin, but because he is in the dark. We see the white Pope, we see Pope Benedict XVI, because he's visible and all the world knows who he is. But the Black Pope remains in the dark, behind the scenes, and so few people know he even exists. But that's why he's called the Black Pope, and he's the one who heads the Jesuit order.
There is an ongoing war against anyone who resists the power of the Pope. And this war is directed by the Jesuits. This war is not waged openly by the Jesuits. Bring a disobedient nation to its knees.
The Jesuits would do that very thing. They were very intelligent. They're still very intelligent people. What they would do is they would infiltrate, they did it through economics, through the merchants. They would then come in, start teaching. They were very wise people. They would then infiltrate not only into schools, but they then would infiltrate into local government and then rise up to higher government officials. We find that repeatedly in the book by Avril Manhattan called Vietnam, Why Did We Go?, where he talks about how they followed this exact plan throughout Southeast Asia. They did it in Japan, they did it in China, they did it in Korea, they did it in Vietnam. They did it all along the Pacific Rim. Well, eventually what would happen, you would have created Catholic cities where all the people in towns would become Catholics. Well, they would then try to put their Catholic ideals onto the major religious populace of a country. In the Far East, of course, the major religious populace would be the Buddhists. So these Catholics in these countries, these converts to Catholicism, they would try to push their Catholicism on their Buddhist friends. And when the Buddhist friends rejected it, the Catholics would start to use force. Well, then the Buddhists would appeal to the local governments, the state governments, the national governments, and then there would be revolution. It got so bad in Japan that in 1639, the Japanese emperor, he said, no more Catholics, no more Europeans will come to our island again. And that ban stayed there for almost 2 centuries.
Texas Senate Bill 4, known as the Show Me Your Papers law, allows officers to ask anyone they detain to reveal their immigration status. Catholic parishes in Dallas came up with an idea. They'd start issuing IDs themselves.
It's not really a state issue. This was made at the federal level, but we can't just leave children in the middle of nowhere.
As for the situation here, one of the migrant children asked the mayor if this was Delaware. The child was trying to get there because that's where mom is. In Kila Bend, I'm Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.
Yeah, we reached out to both the governor and Border Patrol on this. The governor's office sending a statement that reads in part, "We have not received a formal request for resources or assistance from Gila Bend. As the local jurisdiction, Gila Bend may first work through Maricopa County for assistance." Border Patrol has not yet responded to our request.
Violating Minnesota State Statute 609.50, obstructing the process, which will be an additional crime.
In a newly released search warrant, Minneapolis police say this is the man, who we aren't naming because he hasn't officially been charged, who's responsible for stirring up what was seemingly peaceful protests in the wake of George Floyd's death. Dubbed the Umbrella Man, equipped with a sledgehammer, dressed in all black, video of him smashing out the windows at the AutoZone near the 3rd Precinct went viral just moments before the looting began, followed by the structure being set on fire. Police say this was the first fire that set off a string of fires and looting throughout the city, and according to the arrest warrant, the actions of this person created an atmosphere of hostility and tension, and his sole aim was to incite violence. Police say they received an anonymous tip connecting the Umbrella Man to the biker gang Hell's Angels, and investigators have also confirmed the Umbrella Man is a known associate of the Aryan Cowboys Brotherhood, a well-known prison gang based out of Minnesota and Kentucky. Police were able to compare images from the suspect's driver's license with several of his previous booking photos while comparing them to the Umbrella Man images seen online. As of now, no arrests have been made.
Police have also connected the Umbrella Man to an incident in Stillwater where a Muslim woman says she was harassed by a group of motorcyclists wearing Aryan cowboy vests.
This strand of liberation theology,
because they were different streams. Because they were different streams. Not a single thing about that, you know. The preferential option for the poor comes from the same Jesus Christ who in the proclaim in the synagogue of Nazareth, quoting prophet Isaiah, said, I have been sent to the poorest of the poor. And all the gospel is a message about that.